So hello, welcome to this 92nd edition of AirHacks TV. And before we start, just a quick announcement. It's a fact. So some published podcasts. So there's one was with Jason Lee, and I met Jason several times. The Java one, we always had a great time, talking about Glassfish. So I had the opportunity to interview Jason, and now Jason is working on Whitefly. So we also covered lots of ground regarding OpenTelemetry, metrics, and Whitefly. Very interesting for me. It was a nice conversation with Ed Burns, and we had we covered some Java history, how Java server phases happened, and Ed is working right now at Microsoft and Jakarta East Pace, but he was, the main suspect behind Java server phases. And also Andre Michael. So we had a discussion with Matthias Juric and about modules. And Andre pinged me and said, "Okay, I'm not so convinced about your discussion." So we had a discussion once again about modules. So these were actually the podcasts last month. And now back to the show. Let's cover the first topic. I got an excellent suggestion from BioBob, and the BioBob is Robert Komorowski from Slovakia. And what happened? So I published an experiment, a blog post by mixing or serializing and deserializing Java records with JSON-B. And what Robert did, it says, okay, this is actually not needed. So let's take a look at the post. So this was the post. You need only one single dependency JSON, and this is basically a Java record. So this is all you need, everything included in one constructor. And to make it work, what you will need the private visibility strategy, because what Java record does, it ships with private fields. So I expose the fields. And the next problem we have is the deserialization. And for the deserialization, a default constructor is needed. And this was my suggestion. So instead of using the default constructor, what I did here, I created a static factory method. And this method creates the workshops. The problem with that is, of course, it's a little bit, you have to write a little bit. And what you also have to do is you have to configure Maven to accept compiler parameters. So it's not the easiest thing to do. But what Robert suggested is, wait a sec, I have to find my questions. So they are going to be in block. And this one. But what Robert did, he proposed something interesting. So instead of introducing a static factory method, Robert also proposed we can actually introduce a default constructor annotated with JSON-B creator. So you can see this is the default constructor from Java record. It's not like the constructor, Pojo constructor is a Java record constructor. And it is working. So what I did, I tried that. So this was my origin code. And this is Robert's suggestion. And the unit tests look like this. So what we are doing, we are creating a Java record. So this is the Java record with hello, new date, and nothing. Then we use the mapper to save the record. And this works with JSON builder create JSON-B to JSON. And then load back the record with JSON-B builder create from JSON serialized in the workshop. So this is all you need. Of course, I could also save it directly in the, or I couldn't. I could actually put some static methods to the Java record. So on this, it is working. So if we do the Maven package, it will package the entire code, run the unit tests. As you saw, they are successful and they are working. So great simplification. Thank you, Robert, for that. And I will just adjust my blog post. So I like your solution better because it's easier, and whatever is easier is always better. So okay, so thank you for that. And also interesting, what Robert mentioned here is type decorator. So if you take a look at this, and there's a discussion about using JSON-B for Java classes where you have no chance to add any annotations like third party. And this is a long thread actually, but towards the end there's the solution which will come to JSON-B, and this is type decorators. So you can see how active actually the Jakarta E community is. And this is the type decorator builder with Pojo creator builder. So what this is about, you have a Pojo and you have no control over the Pojo. This is the idea. And what you would like to do is to add some metadata without changing the Pojo, because the Pojo may be loaded from a third-party jar or maybe a Java record or whatever. And how this would look like, you could use, of course, this, what I also try to do, or you can use the, the type decorator, which looks like that. So you can say I create decorator, build, I create, add parameter, and build, and it adds the metadata afterwards. So this is like a replacement of YAML or XML. So thank you, Robert, for this, for the hint. Okay, next topic. So did I lose the questions again? Oh, by the way, if we are already here at the meetup, there are some. So the community is growing. So we are more over 600 members, and I'm the next conference around the corner is playing with infrastructure as Java code. So I would just try, to provision the cloud, and this is going to be a free event at the DevCon. But there are at least 3 conferences, which if I found maybe next week I will announce the conferences here. So, and what's the deal with that? So what I'm also going to do, I will in parallel stream the event without recording in low quality, so it doesn't disturb the actual conference, and to a small group of people, so I can announce it easy on Meetup. The problem is if I create an online event, Meetup expects an working streaming link, which I usually don't have. I cannot just expose the speaker link from the conference. So what I do, I add a private link so you can register and you can watch me speaking live. And what I also try to do, I ask the organizers, do you have some coupon codes or whatever? So in parallel, you will get sometimes a full access to conference and sometimes just some % off. So this about the meetup. Oh, the workshops around the corner, and in December that there will be just workshops about the clouds and Java. And the first one is about CI/CD versioning, traffic splitting, load balancing, and testing. Automatic pipelines, serverless pipelines without Jenkins, just cloud native. And the next one, I actually thinking what I will do is like introduction to serverless Java, and maybe next year I will do more just with Pojos and Lambdas, like event-driven architectures in the cloud. So this will be like a smoother transition, just using ECS Fargate, for instance, and Lambdas a bit, and next year just going hardcore serverless and events. Let's see how it works. But there are already sufficient registrations, so both workshops will definitely take place. And but there's some seats available. If you like, please register. Okay, so I lost my questions again. So now back to the questions. So we covered the first questions, or the first suggestion from Mr. Robert Bio Bob, and live from Georgia, Tbilisi, Vano Berica asked me, during the development of our backend using JAX-OS EJBs and JPA, we write unit tests and component as unit tests that mock external dependencies. We also separate project where we write system tests. Very good idea. What's the best way to do test-driven development? So I don't care about test-driven development. It should work however you call it. But what I do, I try to system test first. Why? Because usually, if something goes wrong, it's the remote communication. And so I like to save time. Instead of testing with curl or whatever, I write the simple hello world system tests and then use it and refine it all the time. So this is my way of saving time. what I could do, I could write unit tests first, and then system tests. But writing afterwards tests is a bit, boring and not very productive. So what I do, I write the system tests first, then unit tests, and unit tests. Sometimes I already know they will go wrong because my I think last index of recently, as I wrote last index of without unit tests, and I forgot +1. So this is my classic my classic problem. So I would write system tests first, then integration tests, and unit tests at the end. So this is my approach of when you're dealing with microservices. And if you go to the clouds, it's even more important because you will deal a lot of time with security groups, firewalls, and the principles and roles. This is where things are going wrong, not necessarily your business logic. So it's also important, of course, but yeah, I'm misusing tests to save time. This is basically my approach. I hope I answered your question. So let's see about the chat. So we have a nice chat from Seattle. Carlos Hakin or Chakin. Jeff Rogers. Hello, Jeff. Pedro Alvarez. And do you have any experience with hypermedia as the engine of application state? This is HATE, ORS. You could also say it HATE Oracle Application Server, right? But this is not the right acronym. And the Oracle Application Server is out of, it was shut down. But Hypertext as the application engine. Well, I did it once correctly, so doing twice in a row never works. But what HTOS is like exaggerated, like doing REST the right way. And I would say it is exaggerated JAX-RS. So what I usually do, let's say HTOS 80% or 70%. This is what is working, because if you try and spend 100% of your time do it right, or do it 100% right, you will spend 150% of your time, or even 200-300% of your time, and it's not worth. Except you are building, your public API for something like Stripe, YouTube, AWS APIs, or the entire world will use your APIs. Then I think it is worth to think about proper REST APIs. So thank you, Gregor Krajnitz, and from Seattle. It's crazy. So how is the weather in Seattle? Is it cold, warm? It'd be interesting to know. Okay, now back to this was a little bit of code. And now Mr. Jeff Rogers from Seattle, I guess, asked me, in my training videos about web components, I use JavaScript, and why not TypeScript? So, and if you take a look at this, for instance, this is, I'm actually, what I'm doing in the workshop is usually what I do in projects, and I don't use in project TypeScript. So this is maybe the most realistic template I'm using also in project. It's called BCE Design. And if you take a look at the videos, and you also followed maybe my workshops, it's not like I'm struggling using plain JavaScript. I would say using Visual Studio Code just works perfectly. And by the way, someone asked what's the opinion about TypeScript, or someone asked at Twitter, what can be improved on TypeScript? And what I ask back is, why not to use just JavaScript? If you have Visual Studio Code, this is almost as good as TypeScript. And this was like the discussion just exploded. So if you go to my Twitter timeline, you can still find it. It was like 2 weeks ago. And what I actually wanted to say is that if you're using Visual Studio Code with ES6, you get actually TypeScript. So Visual Studio Code behind the scenes translate JavaScript to TypeScript, and you get, I would say, quite good IntelliSense and code completion. The problem is, of course, not as good as TypeScript, but I would say really good, and this is so good that I actually don't need TypeScript in my projects. Of course, what developers stated back then in the Twitter is we use Vim or Emacs. I have to say, okay, if you use Vim or Emacs, I would say that TypeScript then it's probably the right choice. I use Visual Studio Code and it just perfectly. So if your entire team commits to Visual Studio Code, I would say you are fine. Why I'm not using TypeScript? Because the same reason why I'm not using Kotlin, because Java is good enough and ES6 is good enough. And if I use ES6, I don't have, to justify why I'm using ES6 and not, let's say, elmlang.org, which is even more type-safe than, delightful language for reliable web applications, and they argue there's completely type-safe. So I would say, I always try to use the lowest possible denominator. For instance, in the workshop EHEX Live in December, I will show you that, if you're writing, Lambda applications, we just use Java SE without any external dependency frameworks, just, POJOs like we did in 1997, and it's often good enough. But if we are using synchronous Lambda, then we use Quarkus. So it really depends on the use case. Okay, so this was the answer. I hope that Jeff from Seattle likes the answer. Braka asked me, yes, Braka, hi Ram, when you reconnect BC pattern for backend, do you follow hexagonal architecture as well? I have seen you placing repository bin in boundary. I never use repositories. This was not me. I just use regular POJOs, which are called controls, and they are accessing the backend, so nothing special. And I don't like hexagonal architecture because the hexagonal architecture implies we have 6 different adapters, WebSockets, JAX-RS, and whatever. And I have to say, in my projects, usually I get maybe JAX-RS and SSE, and both are actually JAX-RS, maybe WebSockets, and if I'm lucky, Kafka. So maybe we get Quadro architectures, but no hexagonal architectures. So I don't like the term, and that not like the term. Maybe hexagonal architectures are more appropriate if you have just POJOs. But if you have microprofile or Java E, this is the matter of an annotation. So I place the repository directly in the boundary. Yes. So my CRUD create, read, update, delete. A list Cradle looks like JAX-RS POJO, a POJO annotated with JAX-RS annotations, with injected POJO without the JAX-RS annotations, and then the entity. So I get 3 classes. That's all in the boundary package. If the project, the entity is in the entity package. When the project grows, we get control. Otherwise, we don't get control. So I would say the least possible ceremony ever. And if we go to the cloud, no one cares about our hexagons or whatever. The only thing which matters is actually money. So saving money is the thing. If we show we can save money, everyone is happy, regardless, whether we are hexagons, octagons, or whatever. By the way, I actually wrote down an abstract for a conference, but I forgot to submit it. And this was about octagonal architecture. It's a joke, because why not, right? So, Jeff from Seattle, from Kearney, asked me, is there any value in using only tuples and JSON for JAX-RS service in place of POJOs? Absolutely it is. So if you are using NoSQL databases, the question is sometimes there is no added value of creating POJOs or even Java records. You can use JSON-P, you can use JSON-P, not B rather than P. JSON-P, maybe, let's see. Adam Bean JSON P. There will be, yes, perfect. So I use that, for instance, for configuration, and it looks like a typed hash map. Create reader, file input stream, create object builder, and you have it. And so there is absolute worth of using that, using JSON P, and I lost my questions again. And because you don't have to create the JSONB object. So yeah, so there is a reason. And if you're using the SQL database, let's say Cassandra, DynamoDB, then you can just use the JSON object and just pass it to the backend, or Elastic, also a classic one. So you can absolutely do this, and it works out of the box. Okay, now this was so what happened. So I delivered several internal workshops and conferences, and recently, it was 2 days ago, a fireside chat at the Luxoft conference, which is also free, what was also announced at the meetup. And I got several questions whether Java is actually suitable for the clouds. And it was like I got to know the same question all over the place, different workshops, different conferences. And the question was like, what about Java cold start? And what about, and one developer even asked me, should they learn, Python instead of doing Java? And the funny story is, or funny, the interesting story is Java is actually really good for even AWS Lambdas. Why? Because if you do something more serious in Lambda, you will need more CPU. So usually if you just ship a Lambda with 128 megs of RAM, you get a tenth of a CPU, and this is with a tenth of a CPU, you can hit something in the backend I/O, but there is not much room for doing something more sensible. So if you would like to have one CPU in a Lambda, then you will already have to dedicate more RAM. So the RAM is proportionally coupled to the availability of CPU. So with 1.7 gig of RAM, you get roughly one CPU, and this is usually the best possible configuration. But with 1.7 gigabyte of RAM, these are plenty of RAM for a single Java method. And with that, even the OpenJDK version like Corretto 11, it outperforms Python, JavaScript, Typescript, and all the other scripting languages by 10 to 30%. So, and then you will actually save 20 to 30% per month. And so I was in project where I asked project manager, you are losing actually money with TypeScript, and the answer was yes, we know. But our developers only know TypeScript, and this is the reason. Also, we could save money with Java. So interesting perception, right? So I would say Java is really great for the clouds, which I like Java, so it's good for me. But what I also did, I recorded some screencasts. If you like, take a look at the screencast, because Java is not only great for as a business, business programming language, it is also good as infrastructure as Java code, as code, which I will show actually this week in a free conference. It is going to be the DevCon talk. Okay, so I prepared also 2 links, and the first, this is what you already saw, and I will just remove the BCE design. And there are one fresh project. I actually recently thought about this, why I can actually publish that. And this is AWS Lambda CDK. What is CDK? CDK is the official AWS Cloud Development Kit. And the Cloud Development Kit is not about implementing business applications rather than creating the cloud. And for instance, this template, if you just clone the template and look at this, this is the Lambda function, and it is already a little bit complicated. So what you could just do, I just serializing the entire map to a string. But the map by AWS is already serialized, or the map is deserialized from, or the JSON is deserialized into the map. And this is your POJO, and this is the CDK. So this is all you need to ship a Lambda function to the cloud. So full deployment is included in this, actually one long liner. And this CDK is great because this is a Maven project, as you can see here. And with Maven, it is very easy to share constructs. So we can actually write reusable pieces, cloud pieces. And this is way easier than with NPM, or for instance, at least for me. So yeah, and this is also where Java shines. So we can use one language for defining the cloud and provisioning, and for implementing the business logic. Exactly, and this is even ships with system tests. So this is fairly new. So the project is like, it was after the last AWS TV was released. Okay, so now we have it. So we can delete this one. This was covered. And the next one, Mr. Dmitry Abkhazy from Moscow, live from Moscow. So the question to you, how cold is Moscow right now? And by the way, back to the chat. So we have not to resource class. So Ulrich asked me, Adam, when you say you don't use, do you inject entity manager directly to the resource class? Yes, if there's really simple CRUDL, then yes. But I would say what's the problem with this approach? Usually the JSON classes, they return response, they as parameter you can pass HTTP params, for instance, and they are a little bit cumbersome to unit test. So this is the only reason why I'm not doing this. So usually what happens is I have one class which is polluted with JSON annotations, and the other class is completely clean class without any annotations. And it's injected, and in the second class is where I'm injecting the entity manager. But I was in projects where developers said, okay, we're not testing the resources. We have a great system test coverage. Then they really injected the entity manager directly to the resource class. So we had for CRUD 3 classes, a resource-based JSON class with injected entity manager and the entity. Yeah, that's true. Adam, are you not using Archelion anymore for your tests? I didn't use Archelion a lot, actually, in my projects. So even in my testing workshop, I used Archelion just to show you that it's actually working. I use system tests more than Archelion. Adam, do you planning to do a separate workshop about AWS? I'm doing the AWS Live workshop about AWS. And whether I would like to do an AWS I/O workshop about AWS, it was actually planned. The problem is I got so many requests for real-world projects that I have absolutely no time for recording. But I hope I can do this because, I would like to do this. I don't know about the time, but what happens is in December there are going to be AWS 2 workshops just about AWS. So if you like, please join. I never record these workshops because we have conversation about real world projects, and I like, there are attendees there, live attendees, and don't like, about recording anything related to just because of privacy reasons. Okay, thank you. Now, so Mr. Dmitry, now. The first question is related to stateless EJBs, which is actually a great question. I'll tell you in a second why. The Java application servers use the EJB object pool. Yes, they are reused. And by the way, what's interesting, if you think about this, stateless EJBs, or if you know stateless EJBs, you know lambdas. This is exactly the same concept. Concurrency, cold start, whatever EJBs did, lambdas has the same problem. For instance, cold start in EJBs were prevented with a pre-initialized object pool, right? Lambdas does the same with provision concurrencies. You can say, I would like to have 5 lambdas in a pool, and they are started when there is no AWS start, but when the lambda is deployed. But the same happens on application servers. And the question you ask me right now, the same happens to AWS Lambda. And your question is, if you inject data source or other component, and the bean is passive, there's no passivation. This is put back to the pool and then reactivated. So what happens to the state, to the injected state? And the answer is nothing, because what gets injected are proxies, and the proxies are stateless. And the job of the EJBs is, if we for instance, working with transactions, and then what should happen is, that the EJB has not injected transaction, rather than rejected a proxy to the transaction. So if the transaction gets, in time fetched and then just disposed. So that this is the entire trick. What you can do, I also did it in my workshops. If you have such an injected field, just ask the field for get class, get name to string, or just to string, and you will see it is not the actual resource, rather than always a proxy of the resource. Okay, very good question, Dmitry. The next one. Another question is possibly related to the specifics of WebSphere application server. It seems like you have some problem with remote interfaces. Right, so if you think about a similar problem, if you have stubs, this is the remote communication, and the clients communicate to WebSphere. So what sometimes happens, especially if the system is stateful, the stubs has something like, a session ID encoded or something like that. So if this application server is down and up, this session ID just is no more available, and this is maybe your trouble. So yeah, this is what can happen, and this is really specific to the application server. But you could specify back then whether the stubs and skeletons, stubs is client side and skeletons are server side, whether they are idempotent or not. And if these stubs are idempotent, the server would, for instance, retry on error. So search for idempotency, stubs, maybe you find the setting and try that. Now, Mr. Amar Chair, Mr. Dempiler for Algeria. Is it okay to inject a session scope CDI bin into an application scope CDI bin? If yes, I want to know if it will not affect performance of the application because I'm doing it to end notification for all users. Is it okay to inject session scope CDI bin into application scope CDI bin? Absolutely. Also covered in the workshop. So you can have application scope bin, which is singleton. You can inject into the singleton request scope bin, and then the request scope bin, again, application scoped, and then let's say request scope. So we can have all these scopes mixed up, and this always works because if you application scope bin, what gets injected is a proxy, but the proxy is sensitive to the scope or transaction, so it dispatches in real time to the right bin. So I did it several times in workshop, and maybe even on my YouTube channel. So try to find it out. So Jeff Rogers asked me. So there was a recent, actually fun session. It was Bite My Code, and about a cloud native monolith. And this is what I actually did in the session is how to save money with Java, right? And my observation is, if you think about this, Microsoft invented Typescript because they wanted to build big applications with JavaScript, in browser, right? And if you do something in browser, usually it's just JavaScript. But JavaScript is not suitable to build large applications. There are no classes, no modules, really hard, or back then it was not possible. So they invented in Typescript, which is very similar to Java, to make it work. And now the observation is, the second observation is, if you go, to the AWS best practices, for instance, section, and you take a look at serverless or Azure functions or Oracle Cloud Functions, whatever, and there's always the notion of a single purpose function. The idea you have something, lean, and one function serves exactly one purpose. It's exactly the same discussion we had 10 years ago about microservices with functions even worse. So, and what you end up having in JavaScript and Python, millions of functions. But in Java, we are actually accustomed to build larger applications. And even if we implement, 20, 30 classes in a single Lambda function, it's not the end of the world. I would still see it as a small app or small, not function, small nano service. Let's call it this way. But it is productive. It is easy to maintain. It's a not problem at all. So what I have to say is, if you look from this perspective, Java will even save you more money because you are able to ship less functions with lesser overhead. And if you have 10 functions, they will cost you less than 100 functions in production comparing to the other scripting languages. This is what I did during the conference. And I have no idea whether the talk was recorded or not. I didn't record the talk. So we have to ask the organizers. So I hope that's all. Yeah, this was the last question. So let's take a look at the chat. Braca asked me in Spring Workshop about architecture. Hopefully it's not the Spring framework. So in the Spring, this could happen. You explained our best usage for edge integrations. Has your opinion changed? What are good use cases for AWS Lambda? No, not changed at all. I mean, in my Spring workshop, maybe what I said, or briefly, what I talked in the Spring workshop, it was not about clouds, about synchronous lambdas. And what synchronous lambdas are only suitable for Edge, for Edge. What it is you can have a Quarkus JAX-RS application, ship it as Lambda, and then you can call it, and the Lambda, gets called. You can do whatever you did. It looks like JAX-RS, but it's Lambda. You can also take a look at my YouTube channel. I did it several times, and this is just for Edge. Now, there are also asynchronous Lambda. And they are very useful for everything, but not Edge. And the asynchronous lambdas, they don't have to be called by, or usually they are not called by HTTP rather than by all other events. For instance, if you already are in the cloud and you have your data in, let's say, DynamoDB or S3 or something else, so then you can work almost like with Kafka. So you can, for instance, upload a file to S3. This will, create an event. Your Lambda will wake up, do something with the file, put it to a queue. The queue generates another event, and so forth. So this is like, event-driven architecture. And this is where the asynchronous Lambdas are very useful. And if you go to the cloud, or you are already in the cloud, then I would say the asynchronous Lambdas are far more useful than the Edge the Edge Lambdas, because the Edge Lambdas are more about, lift and shift, how to make your microservices, move your microservice from Docker to the cloud. And it could also help you to save money. So I would say with the synchronous Edge Lambdas, you can have traditional microservices-like architectures. And with the asynchronous Lambdas, you get something like Kafka-like architectures without Kafka. And whether you run Kafka in the cloud or not, it depends on the costs. For instance, it might be that Kinesis actually becomes cheaper to run than Kafka. Then it really depends on the costs. So thank you all. This was actually faster than I thought. Chat was great. Thank you, everybody. And Braka, I hope you are. I'm actually predictable what I say or what not. And back to your question. For the Edge optimized lambdas, we need something like Quarkus because it's suitable. I would like, I don't like to deal with the events. It's just ugly. The entire API from Lambda. I would like to have something like JAX-RS, and Quarkus does a great job of fast startup times and so forth. For the asynchronous lambdas, we just need POJOs, nothing else. So we don't need, any other framework. Do you have a specific extension for VS Code for JavaScript? Jeff asked me. The answer is I use lit-HTML, and this is only thing. And yeah, lit-HTML for syntax highlighting, but no specific JavaScript, and nothing specific. I have for Quarkus, I have one, but it's not JavaScript. So I would say thank you. See you in December. It's the last for this year. Crazy how time flies. And of course, AX Live is around the corner. If you like, register. I will also send a mail, which usually causes, or to the AX.news group, which causes plenty of registration. So if you like to register, do it fast. Otherwise, maybe I will have to close the workshops again because of attendees overflow exception. So thank you a lot. See you next time. Bye.